Today, our nation and every school district is grappling with the serious, immediate, and long-term implications from school closures. And as many parents listening in know, so are all of our students and their families. Winston Churchill is believed to have said that one should never let a good crisis go to waste. The truth is that every crisis, while profoundly unsettling, also contains the seeds of opportunity. So we've been wondering what opportunities might arise from this crisis for our educational system and institutions in the now, the near, and the far. And we're honored to have a panel of experts in the field think about this with us. Rather than reading off a long list of accreditations and accomplishments, and I will tell you that they are very long lists, we've given that time back to each panelist to introduce themselves and to share their passion. I'd first like to welcome author, speaker, podcast host, and change maker, Barbara Bray.
Hi, Carolyn. Thank you so much for this opportunity. One of the things that's really cool is I've known ONEworkplace for over 10 years and the wonderful work that they do, and it's an honor to be here. My background, real quick, I'll try anyway, is that I started as a teacher. I became a coach. In that process of being a coach, I created a platform called My eCoach. And with that, it grew from working at the school, the district, and then in the regional center. It ended up me developing, a consulting program. And that's where I met ONEworkplace. They were active learning. I had an office on Edgewater, not too far from their site there. So that's how I met some of the people there. And I realized the importance of space and also of connections. And during that time, I've done a lot of, since then, I've done a lot of speeches and workshops, and I wrote 2 books, or co-authored 2 books on personalized learning, Make Learning Personal and How to Personalize Learning. And then I realized that the stories really matter, created a podcast, Rethinking Learning podcast, and that's where I've, found out that the stories really matter and the struggles they went through are kind of helping me now with what's going on through this crisis. And in the process, I wrote a book called Define Your Why. And now I'm doing a lot of workshops on redefining your why during this crisis. So I look forward to talking to you and the other panelists about this. And thank you again for including me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Barbara. And I would remind everyone, we will have information about the panelists after the fact. So if you'd like to check out Barbara's podcast, there's actually a great amount of wonderful storytelling and solid information. Now I'd like to introduce and welcome architect, educator, and thinker, Daanish Kurani.
CCV, can you see me?
Yes, I can, Daanish, you're on.
Oh, all right, great. Hey, everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Daanish Kurani. I'm an architect by training as well as urban designer. For the last 10 years, for the greater part of the decade, I've been solely focused on education spaces, looking at how learning environments affect students, how they affect teachers. And my practice, we focus on learning spaces for progressive educational programs. So we work with visionary thinkers, educators, philanthropists, institutions. We've worked with Google, Khan Academy, New York City Schools, Gates Foundation and the Imaginarium, Black Girls Code, Center for Social Innovation, just to name a few. So we're really partnering with those schools and educators and leaders that are at the forefront, really challenging the status quo and rethinking, what are we doing in schools? Why are we even sending our kids there? How do we make it worth their while? So just to give you an example of the type of work that I've done, we've, in the last few years, we've created a wide range of educational spaces, everything from, a boarding school in India that really questions the why of education and Instead of focusing on academics and grades, their focus is on developing happy children. We've done computer science labs for inner city kids in Oakland and New York. We've done a robotics lab for Black Girls Code to help young girls get into STEM. Even a rehabilitation campus where formerly incarcerated men from Oakland, Alameda areas can reset their lives. So anything that deals with education and how individuals learn and how the environment plays a role in that. That's me.
That's Daanish. And I want to say, Daanish, I very much appreciate, I said you were a thinker, and in our conversations, I have to give you 2 thumbs up, because the amount of energy and effort that you've put into this is pretty astonishing, and we'll all be learning more from you. Okay, if I had a third panelist, I would be introducing him at the moment, but this actually fits in totally into our conversation. Our third panelist is educator, administrator, and director of culture, Alexei Gregg. And I was laughing saying his name defies the I after E except before C rule, because it's both EI in both of his names, and we spelled his last name incorrectly on some of our materials, and I want to apologize profusely. However, Alexei is in a meeting with some principals at the moment with the KIPP schools, and so he'll be joining us as quickly as he can. So we're just going to kick this off, and then when Alexei gets here, we can all welcome him with open arms. So the first question that I was going to ask, I'm going to reframe because it was really intended for Alexei to answer first. So I'm going to say the sudden implementation of shelter-in-place has imploded our educational system and failed students in many ways, and we understand that. Clearly, there has been a spotlight on inequity for diverse learners, homeless and low-income students. And Barbara, you and I and the other panelists had a bit of a conversation about this last week, and I'd love you to weigh in on I'm going to remind us that we'd like to consider the possibilities and the potentials for positive change when we answer these questions, knowing full well that it's a rather complex situation at this moment in time. But would you please share your perspective on the shelter-in-place implosion? Oop, you got to have your unmute.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. There you go.
Everyone have to try to read my lips, and what I found out is that this crisis has really exposed a lot of the inequities that have always been there, and especially in the urban areas, and maybe even actually I shouldn't say that, it's all over. It's what's happening is that we just assume that everybody can work online, and that is not what's happening very well. Teachers are struggling because they're not only trying to continue with the same thing that they did in the classroom, now they're supposed to do this online, and they have children and families that don't have access to technology, or they don't have access to the resources, or the parent is an essential worker and not there. There are so many issues that are coming up that I'm hearing, because I've opened up, I didn't mention all the things that, one of the things is the stories, and people feel like, well, Barbara's there, I'll just tell her my story. And I'm hearing so many stories that are of people struggling and scared and not sure what to do. So I feel like this is actually an opportune time to do something about this. Oh, I'm sorry, my cat is screaming at the same time. Of course. But maybe I'll let Daanish say something, and then I'll come back. How's that?
Okay, Daanish.
Yeah. And I'll come back.
And I think, Barbara, that's a great point. We're certainly seeing the inequity play out in real time, and it's just more in your face now. I think it's not even just a matter of, who has a device at home or which schools can provide devices for students to take home. I was helping a family member the other day trying to get on a Zoom call using a Chromebook. And believe it or not, the Chromebook was having issues. Like, it didn't have the bandwidth, it didn't have the processing power, maybe didn't have enough RAM. And so it's not even as simple as saying, you know, who did we give laptops to everyone, or do you have a device at home? Because sometimes that's not even sufficient infrastructure. And, you know, it's these things that we sort of take for granted that, you know, we're starting to see that for a lot of kids, you know, not only is there that gap in terms of their resources and ability to engage with the learning, we're also seeing teachers that don't feel comfortable, right, when they're outside of their element and in this completely new environment, which is it is a learning environment, right? We need to curate this. We need to craft the digital learning environment the same way that we're thinking about the physical learning environments. And you know, I think that in equity, we're seeing even beyond just learning, right? We're realizing that, hey, a lot of these kids depend on 2 meals a day from school. A lot of these parents depend on the school to, you know, just even have their children for time so that they can be out, you know, doing their work. There's so many things. There's counseling services. There's, you know, so many sort of wraparound services, which I know Alexei will chat about, but we're really seeing that our schools are incredibly valuable beyond what we thought they were, right? Beyond just the education.
Well, what's interesting is that parents are saying all over Twitter, all over, oh my gosh, I had no idea what teachers did. I sure love them. They should be paid so much more now. And it's so true and there's another thing that some people shared with me was they have multi-age classrooms because they have children of multiple ages, and all of a sudden there's some schools that are requiring teachers to grade and to give worksheets and homework that's not really appropriate at this time, and especially if you have children at different ages. So now some schools are saying they're waiving the grades, they're waiving the tests. And I'm really proud of those districts and schools that are doing that and looking at the social emotional learning and looking at ways of relieving the anxiety that everybody's having. But we're having meltdowns and we don't know what to expect. So we have to be there for each other.
Right. The bringing up the question about the educators and the great empathy that we're all feeling towards them. We've seen so many stories of teachers as individual heroes. And so it begs the question, in order to minimize the need for superpowers in the future, how might we better support our educators moving forward? What do you think?
I'll answer that, but I saw Alexei just came in. So, hi.
Hi, Danish.
Hey, Alexei.
How's it going?
Oh, welcome, Alexei.
Nice to see you. Hi.
Okay, well then before we move to that question,
Yeah.
I'd like to take us back. We were just talking about that first question that we had, Alexei, which is, well, actually, why don't you take your minute and a half and introduce yourself first? I'd like you to do that.
Yeah, let me introduce myself. Hi, everyone who's on the panel. Welcome to my fellow panelists. Welcome to all of our listeners. My name is Alexei Gregg. I'm the Director of School Culture for KIPP area schools. So we serve about 15, now moving to 16 schools in the Bay Area region. My background is deeply in all areas of education. As a special educator, I've been a Chief Administrative Officer. I've led schools and helped both regional teams and individual schools to implement change to make sure that students and communities are best served. I have also ensured that I'm advocating for, when I was on the East Coast, policy changes around special education so that charter schools, public school, district schools, other schools can work best together to serve our communities. So I just really believe in doing what's best for our communities and for our students. The schools I work with have primarily been focused on serving historically underprivileged populations, so mainly Black and Latino students in America, and the challenges they face, especially in relation to the education achievement gap. However, like Barbara, I think I'm also a big believer in the focus on the human experience and humanity first, and recognizing how we actually need to start from there and giving students and people strong social and emotional foundations, and just the toolkit and the emotional intelligence to be able to handle the various challenges they face. And so that's a great perspective that I hope to bring to the conversation, especially as we are adjusting to really unprecedented circumstances and times for many students and families and everyone across our communities and across the world. So
thanks, Alexei. So we did kind of talk about just the overview of the implementation of shelter in place and the huge crisis that it's created for that entire educational ecosystem, inclusive of all the people that you've mentioned. So I'd love for you to share some of the actions, some of the situations and some of the actions that KIPP has been taking, is it definitely shines a spotlight on many aspects of the issue.
Yeah. I think the first thing is that what's really important is that we've had to take a pause and ask the question of what do our communities and what do our families need first. And I think the interesting thing is, regardless of our experience as professionals, the first thing is people needed to be able to survive, to be able to take care of their families, to take care of their kids. And people are faced in different situations with jobs. We have students at home who are taking care of younger siblings, etc. And so we had to really pulse check with our families first to work out what was going on. For some of our families, that real need was, hey, we need money just to be able to buy food. And so we did fundraising specifically around that before we tried to design any educational experience or anything else, just how do we take care of the community? Because I can't say to a parent, we can't say to a parent, hey, be here with your child and help your child to learn to read or do math if you're worried about how you're feeding your family. So that's first. And I think when we talk about designing, we want to make sure that we're taking care of people first, and giving the space to take care of people first. From there, I think what we move to is, okay, what's possible? What is best for our families at this point in time? And so we really had this dialogue to say okay, what feels manageable for our families, and try to create different frameworks. So if we said, hey, we're going to reduce the amount of work that kids need to do down to 2 hours a day, because nobody has time to actually be trying to do calculus, etc., for extended periods of time. We had to redesign the education experience and are constantly updating that. So I would say first, grounding in what do people need. Secondly, listening to whoever your constituents may be to understand how you're adjusting your practices to respond.
So I think I'd like to flip this to Danish for an interesting kind of retake on it, or reframing that what we're learning through this experience, what kind of impact might it have on place as we move forward?
Yeah, well, and Alexei, as you were speaking, this idea of taking care of people first, it goes back to how we design learning spaces in schools, which is, we created a rubric similar to Maslow's hierarchy, where if you think about it, at the very first thing that we think about when we're designing a school is, have you met basic needs, right? So he talks about food, shelter, water. Same for us, right? You've got to meet basic needs. It needs to be clean, healthy, safe, as a school. That's why it was so heartbreaking to see, even a couple of years ago, you see images of Detroit public schools and, what sort of molds and mushrooms and things are growing inside their buildings. And just this idea that, first of all, we need to create places that just take care of people. From there, then you can start to design for pedagogy and school models, learning models, and people in place. But, first and foremost, it's those basic needs. I think moving forward, this pandemic shines a light on schools' facilities in two ways. One is health and the other is hygiene. So there's a really subtle nuance between those two. So hygiene is, of course, we're thinking about different surface materials. We're thinking about antimicrobial fabrics that, you can wash, and, you have upholstery that you can take care of, surfaces that you can clean. That's what I mean by hygiene, right? And even in thinking about in restrooms, right? Do we have touchless faucets and soap dispensers, and even down to, if you have larger tile, right, you're going to have less grout, and grout, grout is a place where mold grows, right? And so basic things like that. So that's hygiene. We're also going to need to focus on health. And I think this is something that we've really never thought about our schools as a place to promote good health, right? But now we see that, who are the most susceptible in society? They're adults with chronic illnesses, right? That have underlying issues. So of course, these are adults that are in our schools, so we need to take care of them. But also, by essentially growing healthy children, can we make them more susceptible, less susceptible to things in the future? So I think health, thinking about what are we feeding our kids, right? Are they getting enough physical activity? Are they breathing in clean air? All of these things, designing to cultivate these healthy habits, right? And so we work with a lot of organizations in the Bay Area, even, and you'll see this around tech offices, for example, right? When you go into a micro kitchen or a little pantry area in a tech office, right? They try to put the healthy snacks at eye level, right? And stash away the junk so you don't see it, right? So you make healthier choices. So, that's based on nudge theory. And so we use that a lot in design, right? How can we nudge people to make better choices? And I think in schools, it's going to turn to, can we nudge students and adults to live in a healthier way, take the stairs, be outside more, and at the same time, can we nudge people, to take care of the hygienic things as well?
Barbara, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'd like to bring up health because it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And what's been happening all over the social media is everybody's talking about how do we handle this? People are freaking out and they're not sure how to take care of themselves. And I'm really lucky. I'm connected to amazing educators. And one in particular is Shilpi Mahajan, and she's going to be, I have a Twitter chat. I forgot to mention that. And that's on the 18th. We're doing one on mental health awareness and social emotional awareness all the time. It shouldn't be just a month. It should be all the time. And then I talked to Keisha McDonald, who was in Hawaii, and she and I were talking about mental health awareness all the time. But she also mentioned that all of us need to be first responders, even at home, even the parents. Everybody doesn't know what to do. This is the first time we've had a crisis like this. So when you're talking about space, maybe we need to look at what is it going to look like if it's a hybrid model and it's at school and at home. What does it look like at home? Because right now, teachers are showing me their classrooms and it looks just like a classroom. I mean, it's the same thing. And I'm wondering, how can we make it so it's more like you were talking about, Danish? You were saying how it is more of an environment that invites, everyone has a voice and a choice. It's just a different feeling. And how do we do that if it's going to be a hybrid model? If they're going to open up schools part-time, let's say, what will that look like at school? Maybe they'll be there only half-time. Maybe, Alexei, that might happen with KIPP, Yeah. And then the other is, what does that mean for parents who are working, and the model seems so overwhelming, but we could even start some things now to help parents, because one of the things that's good that's happening out of this is parents are starting to become partners in learning with teachers now that they never did before. And kids are realizing that maybe they know more than their parents about technology. I mean, I'm watching kids go, wait a minute, mom, let me show you this. And there's a little 5-year-old that says, now this is how you do the Zoom or something. And so I'm thinking things are going to change because of this crisis. Space is going to change, place is going to change, time is going to change, and the connections and how we learn might change.
Yeah. CCB, can I just piggyback, because I love a lot of
what you're
saying right now. So I just want to double emphasize the importance of mental health, and thank you for raising the fact that this is Mental Health Awareness Month. The first thing that our schools and our principals said to us, actually, when all of this happened, that we heard from kids, is how do we give them social and emotional support? For our youngest students, that was kids just missing the contact with teachers, right? And missing the contact with the community they've been used to. And so what we did was to really think about, okay, it was so funny. People thought mental health was important and mindfulness was important, but they didn't really do it as much. And as soon as this happened, it was the first thing. So we have mindfulness activities that teachers are leading every day. And in our synchronous learning time, so when our teachers are like on Zoom with our kids, the emphasis there is usually much more around reconnecting and building community. And it's what students and even families have said has been really helpful. So I just want to leverage that point of saying mental health, making sure social emotional health is super important, and the consistency there needs to happen, because that's what people experience first. Our brains go to, our emotional brain is operating first. If you think about your fight or flight response, your amygdala is operating first. Your emotional experience happens first, and then we move to like intellect and everything else. And so it's just key when you're designing, you're not just thinking just about the physical spaces, but what's the process flow for the experience that you're designing for the different constituents in your community, right? The second thing I just want to piggyback on is, I love what Barbara said, is that we're coming back to a hybrid model that we don't know exactly what it's going to look like. And so the things that we're trying to think about right now are, how do we bridge that connection over the summer or as people start coming back? So one of the things we are doing is, for example, if you've had a touch point with a person, that person will continue to like be your touch point person as you come back. So you don't come back to school as a person, as a student, without somebody that you knew or trusted over a period of time who understood what was going on for you. Mm-hmm. And then we're thinking about what both Barbara and Danish are talking about, where how do we integrate this? Because we're going to have some students who are online versus not. How do we make sure that those students who are virtual still feel part of the school community? Does that mean bringing like, you know, computers into the classroom space just so that the screen is up so we can see each other? Or are we connecting people just in terms of like small groups or buddies when they are virtual, so they have a community virtually that's seamless with the community that they're now going to face when they're coming back? And we don't have answers for all of these things, but we're starting to redesign the thinking of the educational experience to be grounded in this idea of, hey, this is going to be hybrid, but we need human connectivity that is consistent, whether that person is virtual or in person. And we have to start to blend those lines so people can connect.
So curiously, we're working on the same thing for the work environment and the work community. So you bring us back to almost Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but that we're all human beings and that there are certain human needs that need to be met before any kind of engagement or productivity can take place in any environment. So I think that's a really interesting, and something else that you all have been talking about, but we haven't attacked it directly, is I read a survey of 400 Chicago teachers asking for support. They were surveyed on what kind of support that they would like. And the first thing that they said was access to technology, but then the second thing that they said was parent engagement. So I know we kind of talked about this last week, but I'd love for Barbara, if you'd like to start this off and we can have others join in, but the nature of the parent engagement in the process and how will that look, or how might that look moving forward with this opportunity?
Well, I think we have an opportunity now to reach out. Parents, I mean, let's just think about parents and work. They're asked to work at home now. And they also are told to be the teacher. And they also have, I mean, we also have people that are essential workers that aren't at home. And then they have to think about what are they going to do with their kids. So I think that this idea of looking at this hybrid model for workers, I have a feeling we're going to have more opportunities for telecommuting, telework, telehealth, telelaw, everything. I have a feeling that this will be built in. And I was listening to Michio Kaku, I can't say his name, Michio Kaku. He mentioned that we're going to see space look different at home. You're going to have, you're actually going to have wallpaper that actually has, you can talk to your lawyer and your, so Danish, this might be kind of fun to think about this, what it will look like with this new idea of we're actually connecting virtually, but we're here. together somehow, because I know I have family members that are, I have one that is actually on a board in New York, and now he's doing everything on Zoom. And he was flying all the time, and now he's doing that. And so they're kind of saying, you know, this Zoom thing's actually working for them. And what does that mean? If they're going to start, parents are going to start working part-time virtually, and maybe we won't need the school as much. Maybe it'll be more of a community center where you can go to actually do some of the telework. Or anyway, I'm going to put that out to you, Daanish.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think it's spot on, Barbara. In fact, I think it's about 7 years ago or so, we designed a school in Australia for, it was a very blue collar community. And they needed a lot of those wraparound services that, you know, Alexei, that you're probably providing for kids, right? That they had, you know, food pantry at school, they had a dentist on campus, they had, you know, resume coaching and skills training for parents, and they had all of these things, and their whole goal was, let's just get parents on campus as much as possible because we need them to be more involved with their child's learning. Now, obviously, COVID has made it such that parents can't not be involved with their child's learning anymore, but I think you're right. As we go back to this hybrid model, you know, in order for you know, Alexei, you mentioned early on, like, we have to think about what the families need, right? If we don't think about that, then no child is going to be successful. They'll be fighting this uphill battle. So if you think about it, for the child to be successful, we kind of need their parent to be successful and their parent to have it together and be able to support the child, right? So then you're absolutely right, Barbara. It becomes, now we're designing school not just for teachers and students, but also the parents, right? And what can the school provide that the parents need to help them support their family and take care of their child so that, you know, their child can show up and engage.
Yeah.
I'll jump in real quick, Alexei. As I worked in Oakland, some of the schools for 23 years. So I love Oakland. I'm very lucky, and nice to know that you are, Daanish and Alexei, you're close too. So it's kind of fun. The Bay Area is a wonderful place, but it is tough for some schools. And I worked in a middle school that had a dental clinic, a health clinic. There was morning and after school for parents and for kids. And I think that we need more of these community schools. They're like you were saying. And what I was even thinking of a school. I worked with the digital high school grants, and there was one school. It was in Travis, where I think it was Dell became a partner, and they made it so the school itself, for the high school, was open during the days for the school and at night for the workers. And they had it set up where it was unbelievable. It was so beautiful, with the areas for different types of work depending on what they were doing. But they also made it for parents in the community to learn. And I'm thinking that's what's going to happen, is we're going to have, I think they're going to be more community learning centers in schools.
So Barbara, we did the math back when we were working on this project that your average public school is only in use 18% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about 24/7, 365, 18% of the time, in no business would you ever invest in, you know, a capital resource like that and only use it 18% of the time. So we certainly need to find ways to leverage, you know, these spaces more.
Yeah. I think my comment on that, so kind of what Barbara is saying to it, and Danish, coming back to this idea of how we integrating, I'm going to go in the weeds a little bit here, and I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on this. One of the things that we're seeing too is that we're having to create virtual spaces for families as well, just for families to collaborate. And so we've started to say, okay, yes, we're giving you this information for your student, but just as parents, you need to have community. And before that was like a PTO, but we're seeing actually increased engagement from our parents because everybody is like, you know, home and seeing what's happening. And so one of the things we're also questioning is, okay, when did we come back? Because we're going to have parents in these various buckets, some virtual, some in person, how are we creating an integrated experience for them as well? Not just on the human side, but like on the human side, we're creating like virtual, like some parents, it's like a gathering. Some parents have turned it into a happy hour, whatever it is, so the communities can build together. But there's a variation there, right? So for our elementary schools, for example, when parents come in, our elementary schools have parents that are there every day and they want to see their kid and so on. And so they tend to be around more. And so we've usually had spaces like in even cafeterias where parents can sit, and created spaces for them to like just feel comfortable just being around for a bit. Whereas at our high schools, the students are a bit more independent, but when parents have come in and interacted, they're sometimes interacting with their child and with their student in a process. And so the spaces we've had to create in high schools are a little bit different because they're not as separated, because the parents, when they're there, are interacting with students, but they're not as large, right? And so I just would love to hear your thoughts on, you know, now that we have both a virtual component and we now have these differently engaged families at these various age ranges and levels, just some of your thoughts on like designing for those different constituency groups.
Can I jump in and then Danish,
Yep.
is that okay? One of the things that I'm seeing, I'm really lucky. I've got to visit schools all over. And there was one in Baltimore, City Neighborhood School. It was a K-12 school, but the way the high school is that the kids designed it. And I'm just wondering if we involve kids more in the design and then involve the parents into how can they be more engaged, because I think that if we give them voice, they'll own it more. And that's what happened at City Neighborhoods. They actually said, you know how when you walk in a high school and you see the seniors, the pictures of the seniors, they decided to put all the pictures of the freshmen. And I thought that was really cool. The other thing they had is, instead of homeroom, they had advisory rooms. So every teacher had 20 kids they followed for 4 years. And then they had this room where there was coffee, and the kids even had designed the cafeteria, and they made it like a Starbucks with a stage. I mean, you know, you never know what it'll look like if we give it over to the kids a little more. And I know, Daanish, you said that you involve kids. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, you know, we typically in our design process, we work with the end users of the space, right? If we're going to design a place that people are going to need to be successful and inhabit, you know, so we work with students, teachers, even janitorial staffs, community members. You know, we tend to engage them in that design process. Alexei, as you were speaking, I was starting to imagine what this might look like. And, you know, I could even see where, if it is the hybrid model, then maybe there's shifts, right? There's like a morning shift and an afternoon shift. And, you know, maybe parent comes in with their child and then, you know, they're home for the afternoon, right? Or they're home in the morning and then they come to school together, where the parents, you know, has place to, you know, do their work. But I think what could be really nice is if you imagine, you know, over the last few years, more and more schools are starting to break down the silos between subjects, and it is starting to look a little bit more like the workplace, right? So I could imagine like a commons area, for example, where you've got kids working on some, you know, projects and other things. You also have parents sprinkled throughout, right, that are working remotely. And I was imagining this moment where, you know, a child like strikes up a conversation with another adult who's, you know, not their parent, and, you know, learns about what that adult is doing, that other parent, and you know, get some mentoring, and you know, it really becomes like you've increased the social capital available to your school just by having parents there, right? They become an additional resource for learning, to mentor, you know, the kids.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alexei.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say there, like I said, I've visited a lot of schools, but there's some that are doing something like that now, which I love. That I was just thinking of the school, I think I mentioned to it before, it's Harrisburg South Middle School in South Dakota. They decided that the kids would actually do passion projects during the year, but they also get to schedule themselves. So they have a student scheduler, and they work with the teachers, and they have parents involved too. It's like everyone in the community is part of this. And so if you walk in the school, you'll see kids working in the hall. You'll see kids that maybe they want to learn yoga. And then there's a yoga class and one of the kids are leading it. I mean, or the parents are. And there was another school, it's something that's, all of a sudden I can't remember the name of it, but it's in New Hampshire. And the kids got to choose their mentors, and many chose other students as their mentors around a project, or a parent that they heard was someone who actually had the job they were interested in. And then I just see internship, apprenticeships. I see a lot of ways that we can connect with the community and make it more of that village that they talk about. Okay, Alexei.
I'm just agreeing I agree with everything that you're saying. I think what I start to think about there is, we have some of those things right now where we do advisories as well. And I think we're even trying to go to a deeper level of how we not just connecting the person we have as an advisor, but how are we connecting those families who are part of the advisory. So it's no longer, there's one level of an experience when it's like, hey, I come into a space, there is a single adult or person who's managing my experience, and there's no, and then I go back to another set of adults, but there's no interconnectivity. And so we're trying to say, okay, let's ground in this structure of this person as an advisor, and then let's make sure that the families are also connected with each other, so that there's not this gap in experience between what's happening at school and what's happening at home. So I think that's super important. I think what I was going to just add to pushing on is, I think also we have to consider, so there's the families who are teleworking, but one of the things we're also wrestling with is there are families who are going to be those of essential workers and of people who can't telecommute, and like how are we actually thinking and designing and supporting the physical space and the structure for a wide variety of stakeholders and constituents. And one of the things that we are looking at as we plan for different scenarios is saying, hey, there are going to be some students who are children of health workers, or who are children of people who may be doing sanitation or other essential services, who may need a physical space to be in every single day, right? And so even when we think about, to your point, Danish, around whether we stagger morning, afternoon, we're going to have this ongoing conversation with families to say, okay, this cadre of parents, their students are going to need to be here all the time, and we're going to have to create a certain kind of space and learning experience for them. There's a separate group of parents who are like, okay, maybe I can alternate on days and say Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, depending on the job that I'm going to. And so we're going to create a different kind of educational experience for those people. And then there's some parents who are going to say, hey, I can come in the morning or afternoon. And we have to, I think one of the things that's been changing especially is, I think districts and a lot of educational institutions think of this very top-down model of we say the structure, you fit into the structure, everybody abides. And this has definitely broken that, which I think should have happened before, but this is forcing, I think, those institutions to say, okay, how do we actually work? Because we can't say to parents, oh, just do this or do that, because their experience and their context has changed as well. And so we're trying to change and be flexible, even in the way we're designing our timing and experience for the different kinds of groups that we have in our community.
Alexei,
I want to jump here. Wait, excuse me. I want to jump in here for a minute, if I can, Danish, because we have a question that has not been addressed in any of the conversation that we've had so far, and it actually is critical to the situation. And it's the Melissa Seward Block is asking, in several of these models are suggestion for design, and you're talking about process as well. I'm curious how social distancing is being considered. That is, most are leaning towards fewer people on campus. Parents asked not to come to campus. And how are we thinking about that?
Can I jump in? Because I saw that, and I'm sure all of us can say this, but we're all right now in the situation where they don't want us to come to campus. So we are trying to figure out ways to do some virtual strategies using different techniques to get to connect to the parents. So when we talked in the beginning, we talked about how could we do a hybrid model where we can have some of our parents more involved. And Alexei, you had mentioned that some are having happy hours and things like that. I think that we need to be able to figure out in the future what it's going to look like, but we can start designing it now while we're in this, because we're going to be in this situation for a few more months at least. And then something might happen, and then we might end up going back to it because we don't know what's going to happen with this virus. So yes, I think it's really important to help the parents who are struggling and figure out a way where we can connect. And one thing that I've seen in Zoom is that they're using breakout sessions for those parents that need to talk to other parents with similar questions. And then they are offering counselors, even phone calls to people that need that connection online. So I'm sure there's some other things that you'd like to say.
Well, I think for distancing, one of the things is this should make us question, is every hour and every minute that we spend on campus worthwhile and valuable? If it's not, then let's do it at home, or, we don't need to drag kids there, right? So I think, schools are going to start to really be critical of what needs to happen on campus and what can happen off campus, right? I think we're starting to see that a lot of times content, students can take in content anywhere. They could be, riding on a train, with their headphones in, like listening to something or watching something. So it doesn't matter, like content less so. I think schools will become more about the experiential learning. The things that, you need to physically experience to really grasp and understand. And, for the distancing thing as a designer, what I don't want to see is, I'm starting to see images coming out of Europe where they've said, okay, well, how many desks can we fit in a classroom that are 6 feet apart? Well, if you still have classrooms full of desks facing the front, you've got bigger problems than social distancing. Then it's like, why are your kids even coming to school, and what are they learning in that model? But, I've also seen real estate developers put out, like the 6-foot office, right? And to me, that feels very dystopian, right? I don't want to live in a world where I've never get within 6 feet of another human. I mean, Carnegie Mellon and University of North Carolina just recently, put out research that said, look, people are more, they're healthier when they receive hugs. Like medically, they are healthier. It triggers certain processes in their bodies that make them, fight off the flu better and get less infection. So not to mention the social emotional benefits of human contact and right, we're too gregarious to just say we're going to live forever with the 6-foot bubble. And so I think for us, the challenges as designers is we don't want to go back to schools in a world that's less than what we had before. We don't want to have a suboptimal experience. Then we're not doing our jobs as designers. I think our jobs are figure out how we can make schools healthier and safer without sacrificing experience. And of course, in the short run, we're going to need to do that until we test some of these strategies scientifically and get some data back. But our goals should not be, well, this is it for forever. We're just going to have to be 6 feet apart. That's no one wants to live that way, right? So we have to solve that problem.
Yeah, I'd just say briefly, looking to that question that CCB asked from Melissa, and another question I'm seeing here from S. Klein Smith. We don't know exactly what the social distancing or what the physical environment is, or in the regulations that we'll come back to. But to kind of what Daanish and Barbara are talking about, I think we have to start thinking ahead of time about how are we designing for equity. So to your question, regardless of the context, we have to, I think if we come up with blanket solutions and say, we're just going to bucket people here and say, everybody comes on a Monday or Tuesday, or everybody is, experiencing one thing, I think we're going to fail and we're going to miss an opportunity. I think we have to work much more closely with the groups that we're serving, the communities that we're serving, to get information to take into consideration a number of different factors, and then to design experiences equitably. And so let me give you a really concrete example. In some of our schools in San Jose, for example, our students have adjusted very well to distance learning, and we've provided them all with computers, and they have a lot more flexibility. Many of their parents are, in tech, and the adjustment has seemed a lot more, like, for lack of a better term, natural than for some of our students in other communities. And so there, when we're coming back, the thinking is, okay, if there's more flexibility and there is more space here, we're going to have a conversation with families to design an educational experience to meet the needs of those communities, and to specifically work out who in this community actually needs to have kids being on campus, and what are, to Danish's point, what are the key experiences that everybody needs to have some kind of in-person component to, and which are the ones that we can, like, scaffold out other ways. And so I'd invite you, as you're designing, this is the stage at which you need to be talking to your stakeholders, your community, to understand their needs, and then designing equitably in response to that, because I think blanket solutions will not work.
Can I jump in? Because there's two other questions and I want to answer them before we leave. But there's one is about, what about kids who are not thriving in the distance learning environment? I'm finding that there's a lot of inequities out there, and they don't have the resources. So one of the things that some teachers are doing is they're calling home, they're sending things home and then they're contacting the parents to develop some strategies for learning in a different way. And then the other question kind of piggybacks on that was, what do you do to make it so if you have multiple children, how do you set up your house to be a learning environment? I mentioned that before you got on, Alexei, how there's, parents with multiple children at different ages, and it's really different. The thing is, every moment can be a teachable moment. And the thing is, it doesn't have to look like school. You could actually be learning outside on a swing. And that's, in fact, there was someone put on Twitter, he said, I was swinging with my 5-year-old. We did 30 minutes on the swing, and she looked up at me and said, this is really nice, Daddy. And I'm thinking, these are the things, we need those moments, whatever they are, to be teachable moments, and have them write about them, read together, read in bed, sit in front of, like anywhere. It doesn't have to look like school. And that's the concern I'm having, is that we think that we need to redesign what school means.
Well, and I'll go back to some, Alexei, what you're describing of this sort of bottom-up approach, to me, goes back to things that, we've been trying in education for years now, which is, okay, let's focus on the whole child, right? Because it's not just the academics if we want them to be successful. Let's think about personalized learning, right? So, individualized learning plans, even this recognition that maybe the hours that we have school, 8 to 4, like, that's not the best time for everyone, right? I'm a night owl, so the quality of work that I do from 9 p.m. to midnight is unparalleled at any other point in the day, right? And so if I were in school, I would be struggling, right? If I was going to traditional school. So I think it's a beautiful point that we need it to be a little bit more bottom up, and because that allows us to personalize that experience and to better cater to these needs. In terms of the question of, you've got multiple kids at home and how do you design essentially a learning environment, similar to how we design, I'd say let the kids figure it out, right? That the kids will find the little nook and cranny where they feel comfortable and safe and feel like, this is the spot to do it. And don't be surprised if that changes every hour, right? And that's kind of how we work too, right? It is hard to stay stationary in a single spot for 8 hours a day. So let your kids roam free, whether it's inside the house or outside, and it's sitting inside, like, safely in a closet, or if it's on the couch, or if it's at the kitchen island, wherever it is. Give them that freedom to really discover where they learn best, right? And because that's going to stick with them for the rest of their lives as well.
I'm going to jump in here and just give us a 2-minute warning and say, you're the amazing self-moderating panel. So I'm going to have you own that. You've got 2 more minutes.
Well, one thing I had mentioned when we all got together, that I visited a school in several schools in New Zealand, and the preschool the kids were like that. There was someone under a desk and was reading, and there was another where they had made a fort with a sheet and put it over. And I was thinking, that's what my granddaughter does now. And I'm thinking we could, if we just let go a little bit, and I think it'll be easier for parents too. And by the way, I just want to thank you, I love the conversations between the three of us. This has been really wonderful. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Danish, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I wish I could actually continue. I think the thing that I come back to, I love to ask probing questions that like help to ground me and ground my thinking to go forward. And to Barbara's point, I think we have gotten siloed in our thinking into a singular model of school. And this has unveiled the covers behind like a lot of what we thought was super important is not important, and things that we thought that weren't important need to be elevated. And so the essential question I've been asking myself, and I would ask you as designers, as people working in your communities with students, with whatever your role may be, is what is most important to the group that you are primarily serving, right? And I think if you start to ground in that question, then you start to make different decisions about what you are emphasizing, what you're designing for. I'm going to go back to the comment I saw from that person Smith about, is this going to exacerbate educational inequalities? That's what's most important to us, to actually limit those. And so we, for example, at KIPP are designing experiences to make sure that we are not allowing for that to happen, right? We're not going to allow for our students to fall farther behind. And so what do we need to do immediately to address what's most important for those students in the long term? Because we don't know what the context will look like. And every time we make a tweak, whether it's to a schedule or something else, we have to be grounded in that. And so I offer that question to you: what's most important to the biggest group of people that you're serving, whoever they happen to be?
Daanish, final words.
Out of basically, you know, I would say as designers, Alexei, what you're describing is empathy, right? And you know, as designers in let's say pre-pandemic times, we were applying empathy to, okay, there are different learning styles that children have, right? Are we catering to those? So now it's just taking that same vein, that same type of logic of, okay, we need to be empathetic about where the children are coming from, what their starting points are, what their, you know, what their individual, you know, idiosyncrasies in their lives and their challenges, and just applying that to this challenge, right? Of you know, what happens next. For, you know, anyone that's interested, I am putting together a resource of how schools physically can change and should change, like basically a model for the post-pandemic learning environment. So, you know, anyone that wants to email me, I'll be happy to share that. And it looks at, you know, key areas of schools, classrooms, common areas, cafeterias, restrooms, even outdoor spaces, and what we need to physically do to make it healthier and safer places. And then it'll be an evolving thing. And as Alexei, as we start to figure out, you know, and Barbara, this idea of a hybrid model or whatever this way this goes, we'll continue adding resources. So anyone who wants to email, gladly share that.
That's fantastic. So I'd like to really thank you all, Barbara, Daanish, and Alexei, for joining us and sharing your thoughts on what the future of our educational system might be and how our communities will thrive. And I'd like to thank our Learning Environments team for putting this together and allowing us all the wonderful message that you have had to share. This will be recorded and it will be shared with everyone who registered, and it will be available on our website. So thank you again. We're all wondering.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.